Hello, in my gray using my LG 3 phone versus my LG 6 phone. Let me just do quick notes on some history behind Trnt LeBlanc, because Trnt LeBlanc is sort of an alternate history where the hero Trnt LeBlanc saves the Byzantine Empire. Now, this is a work that was finally published posthumously in 1490, probably written earlier than that, but really in the shadow of the fall of the Byzantine Empire, the fall of Constantinople in 1453. So this is kind of an alternate history. We didn't, it's a wish fulfillment thing for the Christian, for Christians, where the hero saves Constantinople, which the fall of Constantinople can be kind of viewed as sort of a 9/11 moment, or something maybe akin to losing a world war, where the Ottomans take this symbol, one of the sort of last symbols of ancient Christianity, outside of Rome, Jerusalem, and everybody where else had already fallen under Islamic control, and this was like one of the last kind of things where it fell, and it fell also due to the advent of a new kind of technology, the use of gunpowder in the form of cannons and stuff like that. Really, at the time, the Roman countries didn't really give that much of a shit about Constantinople. This was the schism of Western and Eastern Christianity. So even when they kind of offered to okay, we'll reunite the church, the Pope in Rome was not really able to muster any support, and indeed it was a rather kind of pitifully small group of, I think, about 7,000 defenders up against 80,000, and just overwhelming forces and stuff like that, and all these cannons, including a super cannon that could shoot cannonballs up to 600 pounds thing, which indeed cracked the walls, which cannons cracking these super thick walls signaled the end of the giant castle fortifications that had been used in all the kind of siege warfare that had gone on before, where a fairly small force could actually reasonably expect to be able to hold out against a much larger force. But the kind of ramifications of this were that people were weeping in Rome apparently when they heard of the fall of Constantinople. It really shook a lot of Christianity. I think one of the historians that I listened to on BBC's In Our Time talked about it. It's like, well, it was a bad PR time to be cast as the villain in the West, because the printing press had been just recently kind of gone. So there was lots and lots of diatribes against the evil Turk in this stuff. And one of the works that probably comes out of this is Trnt LeBlanc, and the idea of kind of rekindling of chivalry. They actually tried to kind of remuster again a lot of crusading, not to any great effect, but you can see that the literature of the chivalric knight and Christian knight going against evil Moors, the Turks, definitely was revived and was put into practice in works like Trnt LeBlanc. So that is an interesting thing, and something that is still reverberating in Don Quixote as it goes along. So that's my little research thing. Also, another thing that occurs to me as I read this, listen to the kind of the historical stuff, not so much from Trnt LeBlanc itself, is how much I think of the Lord of the Rings and the siege of Gondolin especially I'm thinking about kind of the movie images of the giant siege warfare that was used against the city and its giant walls, and the throwing of gigantic bits of masonry. Obviously, Tolkien did not want to introduce gunpowder into his medieval fantasy world. But it's like, oh, this is where you do get the criticisms of Tolkien as using using kind of the chivalric template for the creation of his fantasy world, and that the orcs and the goblins can be seen as sort of they're the fantasy overlay over what in chivalric tales would have been the evil Moors, the evil Muslims, and the extreme othering that happens in chivalric works is then taken up by something like Tolkien, where it's fantasy evil creatures who are just, they're not human. Like Moors, Muslims were not considered humans in chivalric tales, and you could basically do with them what you want, and you kill them without mercy. So it's an interesting little thing there of just I've noticed that in kind of the influence of like colonial fiction on stuff like Edgar Rice Burroughs' science fiction fantasy of the Barsoom series, and I can see the same thing coming up with Tolkien, looking at these chivalric tales and like how they influence the form and the kind of the ideology of his works, even though he's so interesting stuff. I'm sure that'll get me lots of friends on BookTube, saying that, like, these aren't, these are interesting, slightly troubling little parallels you can take with Tolkien. Nothing earth-shatteringly new, just, me doing it independently, thinking of this stuff. But it is there. So yeah, interesting stuff. All right, I will leave it there. More videos later, including a Trnt LeBlanc review, or hopefully I will organize these thoughts into something coherent.